two, one. Blog Talk Radio.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something. We both took the same oath. To defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that. He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about it, damage that's been done, the anger goes inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to down the moon, down the sky, and drop the sun. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8631.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I'm your host, I am Clay Douglas. And I had one of the main things that I want to talk to you about is this Operation Greenfire. But I think that is answers. I was in on a conference call with a number of people, and had one of my guests on there the other day, the Karen from the whistleblower from the World Bank, but she did not assist in the call as I would have expected. She found fault, and that's kind of what we do. We find fault we try to find the faults with everything without trying to find the answers. But I've been accumulating a lot of information on this operation, and some of the solutions that they're proposing, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But also, across my desk today, across my computer, was a report from Germany in 2002. It was on 9/11, and it was suppressed, of course, by the Bush administration. On Monday, the 6th, August 2001, Ambassador Eschlinger personally notified the President of the United States that information developed by the German domestic secret service, as well as the BND, which is the German Foreign Secret Service, indicated that an attack by a radical Arab group partially based in Germany was to occur on September 11th, 2001. The president at the time was in residence at his farm in Texas. Our German ambassador, they say, was acting in direct response to instructions from Foreign Minister Fischer. This information was developed from official surveillance of Arab extremist groups operating in the Federal Republic, as well as from intercepted communications between the Embassy of Israel and the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Tel Aviv concerning this matter. Now, this report may have been why, when the Germans came over to check on their gold, they were not allowed by the Federal Reserve to see the gold. But they say that this information was gratefully received by the U.S. President, who stated that at that time he was also aware of the same pending assaults. Subsequent to these attacks, the Office of the U.S. President, through the U.S. State Department, made an urgent request to the government of the Federal Republic of Germany that no reference whatsoever should be made to the official warnings given by the Ambassador Ischlinger. In order to clarify the background of this matter, the overall survey of the events leading to the assault was prepared basing on extract of reports from BND's foreign stations. Overall, it is evident that the American authorities were aware of the pending attacks. Why they did nothing is explained in the following general overview, general overview. Because of the Bush family's involvement in oil, Zapata oil, and you might remember that the Zapata oil platforms were used to bring many of the drugs into this country, as outlined in my book, Mystery Babylon, and the story on Operation Watchtower. Many important and wealthy individuals, the German report says, and corporations with oil interest financially supported the Bush political career. Today, the Bush administration is therefore strongly influenced by major American business groups. The candidate for, again, this report's coming out from 2002. The candidate for the American Vice President, Richard Dick Cheney, has been the chief director of the Halliburton Company, based in Dallas, where Bush was governor, is the largest oil service company in the world. Between 1991 and 1997, such important American oil companies such as Texaco, Unocal, Shell, BP, Amoco, and Chevron, ExxonMobil became involved with the former Soviet state of Kazakhstan, who holds enormous oil reserves. The government of Kazakhstan was eventually paid over $3 billion in corporate money to allow these companies to secure oil rights. At the same time, these companies agreed further to give the sum of $35 billion US dollars in investments in plant and equipment to the Kazakhstan projects. Confidential project report of said U.S. firms announced that the gas and oil reserves in Kazakhstan would amount to $4 trillion US dollars. The United States, this German report says, is not self-sufficient in oil, and 50% of their supply is imported from various foreign sources. Some 80% of oil imported into the U.S. comes from the OPEC countries, the Arab oil cartel. Because of the unconditional support by American political leaders of the State of Israel, these Arab governments have very strained relationship with the U.S., which is not necessarily true any longer. A further small percentage of oil imported to the U.S. comes from Venezuela, and Recently, 2002, the U.S. government has been attempting to overthrow the government of Chavez with the help of the CIA and replace it with a government more sympathetic to American needs. And you might be aware that Chavez has died in the meantime from cancer. A position paper prepared by the office of later Vice President Cheney states that Kazakhstan oil reserves would be more than sufficient to supply U.S. needs for at least a decade and would further reduce American dependence on OPEC. Unocal Oil Company signed an agreement with the reigning Taliban forces as well as their opponents, the Northern Alliance, in order to prevent an oil pipeline to be built through Afghanistan and direct through Pakistan to the Indian Ocean. By this, the exorbitant rates charged by the Russians to use their pipelines would be avoided. Unocal then opened official offices in Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan to facilitate the construction of this oil pipeline. In December of 1997, official Taliban representatives were in the United States to attend a conference at Unocal headquarters in Texas to discuss the Afghanistan pipeline. These talks failed because the Taliban made what Unocal felt were excessive financial demands. In 1998, internal strife in Afghanistan and inherent instability in Pakistan reached such levels as to render the pipeline project impossible to execute. In the same year, the Houston, Texas-based firm of Enron suggested instead to build a $3 billion oil pipeline parallel to the Russian pipelines running westward rather than take the shorter, more problematic route to the south. In a secret memorandum by Cheney, it is stated that the Unocal company was prepared to finance the southern route. According to this, the project would take 5 years to complete, and its annual revenues from the successful completion of the pipeline would approximate to billions. However, and this had been the subject of a number of secret American reports, the only thing standing in the way of the construction of the pipeline was the basic opposition of the Afghanistan government and its political supporters. On May 8, 2001, the U.S. Department of State, in the name of Secretary of State Powell, gave $43 million to the Taliban in order to facilitate their cooperation in the pipeline project. In June 10th of 2001, the B&D warned the CIA office in the U.S. Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany that certain Arab terrorists were planning to seize American aircraft, commercial aircraft, for use as weapons of destruction against significant American symbols. This was considered a general warning only. The Federal Republic's warning of August 6th, however, was specific as to the date, time, and places of the attack. On July 11, 2001, in Berlin, U.S. officials Thomas Simmons, a former American ambassador to Pakistan, Lee Coldren, the State Department expert on Asian matters, and Carl Inderfurth, the Assistant Secretary of State for Asian Matters, met with Russian and Pakistani intelligence officers. At this meeting, which was under surveillance, it was stated by the Americans that the United States planned to launch military strikes against Afghanistan in October of that year. Now, this memo, a meeting was occurring on July 11th. The purpose of these strikes was to topple the Afghanistan government and the Taliban in order to replace it with a government more sensitive to the needs of American oil interests. That's I find that pretty interesting, but it simply backs up everything here that we've been talking about. In mid-August of 2001, President of the Russian Federation, Putin, ordered that American authorities be warned of pending attacks on government buildings inside the United States. This warning was conveyed to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow and via the Russian ambassador's office directly to the U.S. president. On August 20th, the government of France, through the American embassy in Paris and their embassy in Washington, issued a more specific warning. This warning specified the exact date, time, and places of the attacks. On September 11th, President Bush and top aides flew to the state of Florida so that the president could speak with children in a kindergarten. At that time, Vice President Cheney absented himself from Washington and went to the safety of the presidential compounds in the mountains of Maryland. It was noted in Washington that Cheney remained sequestered in Maryland for some time and only appeared in public surrounded by heavy security. Now they discuss in this German report the role of the Israeli Mossad in the terrorist attacks. The following two sections were considered to be extremely sensitive due to the special relationship between the Federal Republic of Germany and its Jewish citizens, as well as the State of Israel. This material is compiled from German and American sources. During the term of President George H.W. Bush, the government of Israel made an official but very secret request to the American president. This request was to permit agents of the Mossad, the Israeli Foreign Intelligence, to enter the United States and conduct surveillance operations against various Arab groups residing in that country. The stated purpose of the surveillance was to permit Israel early warning of terrorist plots against their country. Permission for the surveillance was granted with the caveat that the Mossad would have a liaison with the FBI and report any and all findings to that agency. However, these conditions were not observed. The Mossad not only did not inform the FBI of any of its findings, it is known to have engaged in commerce with several groups of Israeli criminals of Russian backgrounds. These groups were engaged in extensive commercial activity inside the United States, to include the smuggling of the ecstasy drug. Mossad agents were able to subvert American criminal investigations through their knowledge of American telephone surveillance of such groups. It is very evident from surveillance conducted against Mossad agents in the Federal Republic, as well as interceptions of Israeli diplomatic communications from the Federal Republic to Tel Aviv, that the Mossad had successfully penetrated various extremist Arab groups in both the Federal Republic and the United States. These investigations disclosed in late May of 2001 that an attack was to be made against certain specified targets in the American city of Washington and New York, but it was apparent that the Mossad was not only fully aware of these attacks in advance, but actually through their own agents inside these Arab groups assisted in the planning and eventual execution of the attacks. That the Israeli government was fully aware of these attacks is absolutely certain and proven. Diplomatic traffic between the Israeli embassy and the Federal Republic of Germany and the Israeli Foreign Office made it very clear that President Sharon was fully aware of the pending attacks and urgently wished that no attempt was made to prevent the attacks. Though the Israeli officials were instructed to warn the American intelligence that some kind of attack might be possible, at no time were the specific dates and targets known at that time to Israeli officials to be given to the Americans. The rationale for this attitude was expressed in a conversation on August 1st, 2001, between the Israeli military attaché in the Federal Republic to a member of the Israeli General Staff. It was stated that Israel believed an attack on the continental United States would so inflame American opinion that they would permit Israel to cleanse their state of Arab terrorists and those who support such terrorists. This cleansing would be explained as an expulsion of all Arabs and even Christian groups from the Palestine area. American intelligence officials have repeatedly expressed great concern in meeting with our people that the Israeli government, through a company, you're going to love this, Amdocs, called Amdocs. This is the very companies I've told you arranged for the tapping of my phone when I referred to, when I put building number 7 on the cover of my magazine. Amdocs was able to conduct surveillance of all telephone communications within the United States. It was categorically stated that this Israeli-based firm was given the American contract with 25 of the largest American telephone companies. This contract was granted over the objections and concerns of American intelligence community. And by the way, Amdocs got a lot of offices up in Canada also. The official reason given for this extraordinary arrangement was to permit Israeli agencies to observe all highly confidential telephone calls, was that the United States had a special relationship with the State of Israel, and they had requested this. This German report goes on to talk about the Israeli political influence in the United States. It should be noted here, they say, that the professional Israeli lobby in America is huge in size and considered even by American colleagues to be a very powerful and entirely dominant factor in American politics. The American Israeli Public Affairs Committee is the largest foreign lobby in Washington and fourth most powerful lobby in the country. Other Israel groups also include the Anti-Defamation League, whose national offices, along with the Israel Trade Mission and many Israeli consulates, many Mossad agents were working. From whose offices many Mossad agents were working. The Jewish Institute for the National Security Affairs and the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. These groups, in conjunction with Jewish-dominated media giants like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek magazine, Los Angeles Times, Time Warner, AOL, and their CNN News network, basically control the dissemination of news to the United States. It is therefore almost impossible for any news that would be considered in opposition to Israeli interests to appear before the American public, although such stories are readily available in most European media. Now, I started my book called Mystery Babylon with the idea that I was trying to counter this press. I was trying to inform people about the Department of Homeland Security coming attacks on America, their responses to it, and everything else. And it's okay. This report from Germany says the role of Christian fundamentalists in American politics. The so-called Christian right consists of Protestant fundamentalists, where the so-called Pentecostals play a dominant role. This is a very fanatical and aggressively missionary denomination that believes in the return of a living Christ to earth and the subsequent elevation of its members to heavenly paradise. In order for this appearance of Christ to occur, several factors must be in place according to the view of this denomination. In the first place, a number of Jews must convert to Christianity, and in the second, there must be a rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. As the site of this temple is now occupied by a major Islamic mosque, it will be necessary to destroy this building. Starting as an Episcopalian, Bush tried other Protestant denominations before joining the Pentecostals. Apart from the U.S. President Bush and his Attorney General at the time, John Ashcroft, other members of his administration are members of this denomination too, which is the second largest Christian denomination after the Catholic Church. As a considerable part of American public sentiment is strongly opposed to religious fanatics, these facts have been kept very quiet. Bush and his entourage are strong supporters of the State of Israel because of their belief that the founding of this nation is viewed as another requirement for the return of Christ. For this reason, Bush unconditionally supports any program put forward by the Israeli government, is a devoted follower and supporter of Sharon, the Israeli right-wing minister president. Attorney General Ashcroft, you're either with us or against us. I had that on the cover of my Free American. Has stated in a public sermon, and he is a lay preacher of the Pentecostal Church, that Muslims are agents of the Antichrist and must be destroyed in the so-called Battle of Armageddon. According to the beliefs of fundamentalist Christians, this battle will be fought over Israel's existence and will lead to the end of the world and the return of Christ. It is generally known in Washington that Bush is entirely guided by his religious beliefs and that he has been attempting repeatedly to force his views onto the American public by means of various disguised programs such as religious control of charities, unconditional support of Israel, and so forth. Now for the summary and outlook. I mean, basically what they're saying here, folks, our politicians are being controlled by Israel. They believe that Israel is the necessary for this whole return of the Messiah, who, show me some ID, could be the Antichrist very easily. The terrorist attacks on American targets were fully known, so says the German report. They were fully known to many entities and well in advance. The U.S. President was fully informed as to the nature and exact time of these attacks. The U.S. government in general and the U.S. President in specific have become subservient to the wishes and plans of the Israeli government. As these plans encompass the removal of the Arab population of Israel and adjoining territory, it is evident that the population of the United States is being pushed into a situation that could easily result in more terrible attacks on their home country. In view of this possibility, the U.S. authorities are determined to limit any discussion of the September 11 attacks to the official versions as it appears regularly in the U.S. media. What does that mean? Does that mean, well, the attack on me, was that CIA? Was it Mossad? Was it ADL? Was it Southern Poverty Law? Was it an AIPAC agency? Because I did cast doubts on the fact that no Arabs in a cave in Afghanistan made the U.S. Air Force stand down. That building number 7 went down, and Larry Silverstein said we pulled the building. So all of that came out in my magazine, and of course, you know the rest of the story. It also appears, says this German report, that Bush's plans to attack Iraq are mainly based on a desire on the part of Israel to remove Saddam Hussein. Tel Aviv views Hussein as a real threat and has already attacked that country before. There's evidence that if Hussein is toppled by American military forces, the oil resources of Iraq would be put under the control of a consortium of American oil industries, that so avidly support the Bush administration. Well, that's exactly what's happened, hasn't it? Now, this, I'm working on an article right now for Veterans Today. And I'll just give you a little input on this. I said that things are happening so quickly now as more and more people are awakening to the fact that our bankster-run government is not working on the behalf of the American people. Thomas Jefferson's admonition that if you ever allow a private bank to issue your money, the banks and the corporations that spring up around them will leave your children homeless in the land, in the country we created, we founded, to try to set it free. take care of a little bit of editing here. You know, this statement he made has suddenly acquired more meaning for people living in those energy-guzzling boxes in our suburban neighborhoods, as millions have had their homes repossessed by banks they'd never heard of. Now, I've been reporting through my magazines and radio shows on the advent of the New World Order since 1994. Shortly before my accident in 2004, I came out with my film True Face of FEMA, filmed at Sandia Labs with Colonel John Brinkerhoff, briefing law enforcement on the so-called dangers we will face in the 21st century. He tells them that we are in for a long war, might even be longer than the Cold War, and this war will be fought on American soil. He tells them that the enemy is weak and does not have tanks, planes, or helicopters, so they will use unconventional means. He said we will need hundreds of thousands of well-armed, well-trained, organized, disciplined troops to control the American people. If we have a natural disaster of significant magnitude, an atomic attack, or a single case of smallpox in a major metropolitan area, because some people just won't follow orders. Meaning, some of us will not line up on the Walmart parking lot to get a vaccination. That will give us a disease that had been eradicated for over a century here. Now, I've been telling you that any time a communist regime takes over a country, they go after three classes of people in order. They go after the farmers first, because they do not want you being able to feed yourself. They go after the intelligentsia next. That would be anyone smart enough to know what they're doing and have learned from history. And third, they go after the veterans and law enforcement still loyal to the old regime. We are in that stage now. The self-sufficient family farms have been under attack for 100 years, and the last Homeland Security assessment pointed the finger at our veterans, along with true Christians and resistors, like Christian Identity, like militias. I have told you that they're going after the self-sufficient family farms. They are attacking just like they did up in Arlington, Texas. One group doing growing their own food, were attacked by a SWAT team. They were born. They had no drugs, nothing there. They handcuffed them. And put them into the and tromped on their tomato plants. All they were doing was feeding people. Now, I've told you that this attack on the Gulf, that was an attack on our food supply. They are going after our food because they go after the farmers because they don't want you to be able to feed yourself. They don't want you to do that. And they are poisoning us with their pharmaceuticals, with their water. I mean, the water you are drinking, now it's becoming a little bit radioactive, but it's been sprayed. These chemtrails have been put into this aluminum, this barium, and every time you flush some pills down the toilet, that those antibiotics end up in your water supply. End up in your water supply. Now let's see if I can actually talk about that. Now this gentleman tried to sell you something. He wants you to know about. He's got a booklet on your water supply, and I'm not here to try to sell you anything, but what he's telling you is right. So, just to kind of recap here, the war in Afghanistan is also about drugs. They didn't report on that. They didn't report on that. But our troops are guarding the opium poppy fields, and Pat Tillman was going to tell you about it. And they don't. They killed him. Friendly fire my ass. The in the Mount Shasta, Mount Rainier is going to. They got warning signs up telling you not to eat the snow, not to make water out of snow. Don't put the snow in your canteens, let it melt and drink it. Don't do that. Now let's see if we can hear this. Let's see how this comes out.
But China's 1.3 billion people are desperate for water, and this Chinese water crisis could have a surprising impact on the U.S., whether they try and take our water or not. See, they've got 20% of the world's population, but only 7% of the world's water. That means each Chinese citizen gets just 22 gallons a day. Here in America, the average person uses about 150 gallons per day. Now, the Chinese aren't huge fans of America anyway, but imagine what they're thinking. Here you have a country with a fraction of the people using a whole lot more water. It's not hard to see how the Chinese could get jealous, and America could be facing a pretty big threat. But let's back up for a second. By 2030, China's expected to be 190 billion cubic meters short on water. That's about as much water as is in Lake Mead, where the Hoover Hydroelectric Dam is. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know you can't pipe that much water in. But this isn't just a problem China's going to have in the future. Right now, there are 11 provinces knee-deep in what the World Bank calls water poverty. One of those provinces is Beijing. And not only that, but according to Business Insider, 190 million Chinese regularly drink polluted water. That's an obvious bad idea. It leads to, quote, far above average mortality rates. Translation, their water is killing them. But you might be wondering what this has to do with you, or the United States. Well, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that China is one of the U.S.'s largest foreign debtors, and we're having some problems paying them back. One theory is they could call our debt in their currency, yuan, or in gold. But what if they decided to call us out in water? Sounds far-fetched. But any way you slice it, the Chinese are going to need our water. Actually, that's wrong. They already desperately need water, and we've got a lot of it. Or at least we used to. The problem is, the U.S. is entering a water crisis of its own. That's why I want to share with you the #1 free water secret you need to know in the coming collapse. Just a warning, you might not survive the water crisis without this. But the good news is, if you know how to turn on your tap water, you're overqualified to use this simple secret. So let's get down to business. The world is running out of clean drinking water. And as humans, we can't survive without it. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. The Earth's surface is 71% water, but we can drink less than 0.036% of it. And most of the water we can drink is in a giant lake in Siberia. And the way the population is growing, polluting and destroying nature's water filters, we're going to be out of water soon. Some scientists say around the year 2030. The good news is we've got some time. 2030 is a pretty long way off. Don't get me wrong. I'm not thrilled about the idea of having to figure out some way to live without water, but there's not a whole lot we can do today. But here's where things get tricky. If you live in the U.S. and use well water or city water, you may not have that long. That's why I made this video, to show you the simple free water secret. It'll literally let you stockpile as much water as you want without having to buy a single bottle. And the timing for this video couldn't have been better. Here's why. Lately, the U.S. government has been trying to do what it does best: cover up what's really going on in the water crisis. It's not surprising. Just like the economy, it's too big to fix, so they just go into debt and pretend like everything is great. But the feds have slipped up on a couple of vital details. Number one, we're wide open to terrorist attacks on the water supply. And number two, we're using a water system that's 80 years out of date. We're talking pipes that are 100 years old in places like Washington, D.C. No wonder we had 250,000 water line breaks in 2010 alone. But there's an even bigger problem. You might not realize it, but your tap water could be poisoning you. And that's whether you use a well or city water. But don't take my word for it. Here's a clip from an article published in August 2011. Quoting, "We," they're talking about the U.S. here, "have the safest drinking water in the world, except for the pesticides that sometimes sneak in, and the rocket fuel, and the antibiotics." End of quote. Long story short, they're saying our water isn't safe at all. Now, this might sound like some fringe conspiracy theorist, but it's not. This article was on the front page of Reader's Digest, a magazine who is about as far away from shaky theories as you can get. So if they're picking up on it, you know the situation is obvious. They go on to talk about the many scientists who found disturbing chemicals in our tap water. Stuff like bisphenol A. If you haven't heard of this puppy, you should check out Alex Jones from InfoWars. He's found some pretty disturbing stuff about how this has turned male mice and rats into females. Literally. And there's a pretty strong hunch the same thing is happening to us men in the U.S. Another chemical to learn about is fluoride. This isn't my area of expertise, but there's a lot of very smart people making some strong statements. You might be surprised to hear that many experts are maintaining that the government is using fluoride in the water to dumb us down and make Americans easier to handle. This sounds about right when you look at the current generation of teenagers. But whether you believe any of those or not, here's the one that got me. You know all those extra pills people don't use? Pills for everything from birth control to artificial hormones to painkillers? They're flushed down the toilet, or thrown in the trash and end up at a public landfill. No big deal, until you realize those same chemicals that are illegal to buy without a doctor's prescription are showing up in our water, and after you drink it, in your body. Not that big of a problem since there's only a little bit of it in the groundwater, right? Well, that's what I thought until Dr. Frederick von Saul from the University of Missouri explained that some of these drugs can hurt you, even if there's a teeny tiny amount in there. They get into your body, look like a hormone, act like a hormone, and can screw things up pretty bad. Bottom line is, it's been proven over and over pharmaceuticals are in our water. But before we get to the water secret we're here to talk about, let me introduce myself. My name is Damian Campbell. You might have seen some of my presentations being passed around Newsmax, Town Hall, or WorldNet Daily. I'm the author of Survive Anything and the 37 critical food items sold out after crisis. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 people have read my guides, and over 1 million people have seen my food stockpiling presentation in the last few months alone. But please don't think I'm trying to show off by telling you this. Honestly, this part gets a little uncomfortable for me. It feels like bragging. Please understand, I just wanted to let you know that I'm not some yahoo or conspiracy buff up here spouting the latest doomsday nonsense at you. But here's the most important thing you need to know about me. I'm a red-blooded American, and I'm proud to say it. This water crisis is potentially the biggest threat America has ever seen, but I don't plan to go down without a fight. Anyway, that's enough about me. We don't have much time, so let's dive right in. You need to know this one weird water secret to survive the U.S. water crisis. This can be the difference between having plenty of crystal clear drinking water for you and your family, or thinking of dirty mud puddles and oasis. Now, before we get there, one thing you need to realize is even Uncle Sam is starting to pick up on this crisis. California, Texas, and Florida all have publicly stated they're in a water crisis. You can see them yourself if you check Google. And the EPA says at least 36 states are expecting water shortages, even in non-drought conditions. But here's why you should care. The more obvious it becomes that the U.S. is in the middle of a water crisis, the more the feds are going to try to lock down the cheapest and most effective ways to purify and store water. After all, what better way to push the liberal collectivism agenda than by controlling a resource we can't live without? So, please, take a couple of minutes to watch this entire presentation. Turn off your cell phone, close any other tabs or windows. I think you might be surprised what you learn. Hopefully, by the end, you'll completely understand the secret to having pure drinking water, even in a crisis. Honestly, right now our tap water, even with all the crap in it, is better than nothing. The problem is, we're wide open to a terrorist attack on our water supply. Think about it. We guard power plants, but we don't guard water. Which do you need more to survive? Exactly, water. But back in 2003, the FBI issued a big statement saying we weren't at risk. Supposedly, our water is completely safe from a terrorist attack. The logic they used was it'd be impossible for a terrorist to dump enough bacteria in a reservoir to poison us. And you know what? They're actually right. The problem is, just because they're right about the reservoir doesn't mean that's the only way a terrorist could hit us. There's a much simpler method, and they've got to already know about it. It's almost too easy. Anyone can open a fire hydrant, shove some chemicals in, and poison an entire neighborhood. Or they could just strike the place where all the water comes together, the water treatment facility. But the scariest one to me is a dirty bomb. Whether you're on a well or city water, if they hit us with a dirty bomb, it'll make our groundwater radioactive. And everybody knows that kind of water is the kiss of death for your internal organs. In all honesty, it's not something the U.S. government is ready to handle. In fact, they're not ready to handle much of anything when a crisis hits. By the way, you can verify this yourself. Go down to your local government office and ask to see their emergency plans. Just be careful. You might not like what you see. The reality is, the government can't stop high school kids from skinny dipping in a water tower. What would happen if a person really wanted to do some damage? And that's all assuming the government is around to handle it. Economists predict that we're going to get hit with another economic downturn any day, and the threat doesn't show any sign of letting up. Real unemployment, not the way Uncle Sam skews the numbers, is higher than it's been since the Great Depression. And U.S. debt is skyrocketing from a bailout that didn't work and a president that didn't care. But as important as our economy is, what do you think is going to happen to the basics like food and water when the government's house of cards gets knocked over? Bingo. The whole infrastructure is going to collapse on itself, and water is going to be a precious commodity. So the way things stand now, you've got two options. One, you can do nothing and hope the government gets this all worked out. Or two, you can take matters into your own hands and find a free or cheap way to get clean, pure drinking water for you and your family, no matter what happens. If you're going to count on the government, you got my prayers. Hopefully it won't be too late when you come to your senses. But if you're going to take matters into your own hands, I want to help you.